All right, keep my stuff out. Your final edit's usually about, what, 5 minutes or so?
Oh no, it's the entirety of the story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like the whole thing.
Because if I have an idea. I want to be a little playful with like some things. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's totally fine.
If I read a poem first, it's okay?
Yeah, totally
Because I'm recognizing the form.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'll become sincere, but recognizing the form and the artifices is kind of like my first. I have to recognize or try to recognize as many as possible before I can
totally
speak
fine.
earnestly.
Yeah.
Is that good? So I'll take you through my process of getting to earnestness.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
That's totally perfect.
All right, let's do it. You're already shooting, aren't you?
It's already done.
I love you, man. I love you. I was hoping, but then I forgot about it, and that's exactly how you do it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, The Untrustworthy Speaker by Louis Gluck. Don't listen to me. My heart's been broken. I don't see anything objectively. I know myself. I've learned to speak like a psychiatrist. When I speak passionately, that's when I'm not to be trusted. It's very sad, really, all my life. I've been praised for my intelligence, my powers of language, of insight. I'm not Louis Gluck. In the end, they're wasted. I never see myself standing on the front steps holding my sister's hand. That's why I can't count the bruises on her arm, where the sleeve ends. In my own mind, I'm invisible. That's why I'm dangerous. People like me who seem selfless, we're the cripples, the liars, we're the ones who should be factored out in the interests of truth. When I'm quiet, that's when the truth emerges. A clear sky, the clouds like white fibers. Underneath, a little gray house, azaleas, red and bright pink. If you want the truth, you have to close yourself to the older daughter, block her out. When the living thing is hurt like that, in its deepest workings, all function is altered. That's why I'm not to be trusted, because a wound to the heart is also a wound to the mind. I could do without those last two lines, but hey, it's Louis Gluck. Can't argue. So yeah, I think I was saying to you about witness. The idea of witness changes both your access to what's in yourself, as well as like your presentation of it. Like already, I feel like the words like changing form just a little bit. You know, it's like a hand with two thumbs on one hand. You know, things get murky quick. Story. Well, I have lots of stories about Houston. I came here when I was 6. I was 6, and Hurricane Alicia hit, and experienced my first tornado within a few months of being here. Amazing, and they never really happen here, so I'm always expecting them to happen again, and they don't. But that's also part of that whole speculative media, where if you speculate, you don't have to pay attention to reality as much, because speculation, 90% of the time, you're proven wrong. And that's kind of the point of speculative economy, speculative journalism, speculative everything. So, especially speculative weather. It's a daily thing. How's the weather today? Well, you're probably going to be wrong about it, and we need to be reminded we're going to be wrong about it so we don't pay attention to the things we can predict. So, I'm going to tell you a predictable story. When I was 19, I was still living in Southside. Kind of did a little bit of a small movement, little by little, coming up towards downtown. I started playing music here when I was 14. Started playing Zeldas at Fitzgerald's. That was nice. Zelda's was the downstairs name, and Fitzgerald's was the upstairs for, you know, Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald. But I didn't know that, and when I found that out, I felt like I wasn't allowed to really be proud of the fact that I played there with those names, because I didn't know who they were. But there was a guy there all the time. They called him the Tie Man, and he would sit at that little bar downstairs. Where was the bar? I don't remember where the bar was. I can only imagine it now. but he would be drinking there almost every day. Believe he was a postal carrier, or no, he was a salesman. Maybe he was a tie salesman. I don't know. But he would take off a tie and cut it and staple it on the wall, and that whole back wall was full of ties. So that's one story. That's something about Houston. And coming up here was a bit of a struggle, coming from the suburbs, and like the city was spread out, wasn't as filled up as it is now, as it's becoming more and more dense with the skyscrapers or the condos. There'll be skyscrapers around here soon, as soon as there's enough finance to push this forward a little more. And it was hard to get people out to shows. It was insane. And it's still that way a little bit, but coming into town, got to see some of the scariness. You play open for a national act, and someone in the back is, probably 4 or 5 people in that back room are doing something, and you see it or smell it. And you play a show, eventually, 5 years later, you're gonna finally witness your first drug bust. So things like that, that's just Houston. It's always been that way. But moving into the city and living here, that's another experience. Did it piecemeal. First Friendswood, then into Fuquay, and then finally up here. But the move from Fuquay to here is the story I want to talk about. I was 19. Yeah. And called my father, asked him for money. Told me he didn't have any. And we both knew it wasn't the truth, and we both knew that we were accepting something with that. My roommate had jet off to me, that'd been interesting. Jet off from me, she just disappeared to California, or no, Chicago. She had an affair with this guy that everyone respected, and out of embarrassment or whatever, she just left all of her responsibilities, and one of them was paying the rent, so I had no choice but to break that lease. I was dating a girl whose boyfriend had died about 6 months prior to that, and that's murky and ugly for me looking back at. And it gets even worse because I tell her I have no place to go, and she's like, well, you can come stay with me, and I'll ask them about it. And I'm like, okay, but aren't you living with your, I didn't say it in these words, but aren't you living with your dead ex-boyfriend's parents? Yeah, and she was. It was, I had nowhere else to go. See how like the story goes? With an audience already here, I'm giving you the knife. I'm giving it to you. And if you want people to speak, you have to hold the knife but not use it. That's the challenge of the listener, of the reader. That's the act of empathy. The act of empathy actually is to give the knife back to me. And then I can put it down because it has no use here. So I moved in. It's terrible. Like this daily, like what is permissible, what is not, like emotionally. And let alone the class difference. Like I was right there about to be homeless. I mean, like right there. And then I was living in West U, and a very powerful family, and it was really, it was too much. It's too much for a 21-year-old. It was too much for a 19-year-old. It would be too much for a 40-year-old. I mean, it takes either deliberate ignorance or a sort of opaque access to self-knowledge to remain in a situation like that. But yeah, her I don't know how to name him even, you know. Her former partner that had passed away, way too many words, you know, euphemism skirting moral judgment. And yeah, little brother was not happy with my presence. In some ways, perhaps I was a competition for the former, as though I was a replacement, in which I had no intention, but I was, and he saw it. And the way his mother was with me, taking me in and grieving through me, and them not knowing about me and her, it's really tough. It's really tough. And then this really crazy thing happens at Enron, and yeah, that was ugly. Then the house shuts down. It gets real quiet. It gets filled with lawyers, and of course we have to go. And by that time, we'd saved enough money to get our own place. And but it was as though this rising up of this moral murkiness had manifested itself into this huge expression, and judgment came and said, "You have to leave now." It's not that convenient. It's not that convenient. I don't talk to her anymore. I send them messages sometimes, tell them thank you for the kindness, more than my father showed me. I learned about the kindness of people who are being persecuted by the media, the limits of their involvement by hearing the discussions and the lawyers, how little control anybody has over right and wrong as soon as it leaves their own hands. So it's a story about mercy, perhaps, or maybe it's a story where you shouldn't trust me at all, and I haven't told you my part in it. That's it. That's a story, right?
Yeah, it's a story.